a morality update. Everyone else is prophecy, well, maybe not everyone else, but I'm used to a lot of pastor friends of mine who do prophecy updates. And, it's like, man, let's just do a morality update and look at what's going on in the world right now. And it's crazy. And so we're going to be hitting a bunch of topics. And I tried to stay mostly with Washington State news because that kept me busy enough. And it was depressing enough that, I had to start narrowing things down and like, what do I toss out? Because there's just too much information. And there's a point where you're really beating a dead horse. I could just continue to show you all the crazy debauchery that is involved in the world around us. But before we do that, I think some verses that might help put things into perspective. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, it starts off by saying, "But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. Men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." If you believe that what the Bible says is true, and if you believe that we are in the last days, then we ought to expect this, right? Either this is going to happen or the Bible's wrong, or maybe we're not in the last days, but it seems that all Bible prophecy would point that way. Now in Peter chapter 3, so 2 Timothy 3, now 2 Peter 3, he starts off in the first couple verses. I know I'm writing this to stir up your mind, to remind you, make you mindful. And in verse 3 he says, "Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. And for this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, by which that world then existed, perished, being flooded with water. But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men.'" I left my water over here, and I'm going to need this tonight. So, as we look at this stuff, we should not be surprised that people are going to be evil at the core, that they're going to be lovers of sin and want to promote and do sinful things. And here, they're going to be scoffers, and they're going to willfully forget. That those words always have jumped out at me, that to believe what people believe today, you kind of have to intentionally choose to believe it. It's not so much about facts. It's really just that I know what I want to believe, and it doesn't matter what you bring before me. I'm going to just ignore that because I have something I want to believe. And why? Because they're walking according to their own lust, the Bible says. They want to just do what they want. They don't want God in the picture. And the first thing it says right there is that they're going to deny the flood and creation. And so, although it's not contemporary, what's up in news right now, up and happening, on my list of things that I wanted to cover tonight, the first on my list is just a reminder, because we were talking about Babylon this morning, and the idea that Babylon was a city, it is a city that is yet to come, but it is also the idea of a system created by Satan. And in Revelation 17 and 18, it kind of breaks it down for us that there's a religious system and there is a governmental system, and that Satan is using these two forces, false religion and the government, and different governments. And as you move in the book of Daniel, you'll see that there are demons that are empowering different governments. They talk about the Prince of Persia. It talks about that there's demons that have their hands involved, influencing governmental leaders and helping governments and wicked governments rise up, and all these things that God appoints all leaders to. So we see all this stuff. We know that there's a spiritual side behind all of this stuff. And so, speaking of denying the flood and denying creation, really going back about 175 or so years now, we find the theory of evolution gaining popularity. And it's not something I'm going to spend a lot of time on tonight, because it's a huge topic in and of itself. But what's fascinating is to study the evolution of evolution. if you've never had a chance to do that, to read the first people who started promoting it, their reasons and their theories, and much of it was the earliest people in the 1800s to promote evolution. Their core thought is we have to believe that some other thing created us because the alternative is unthinkable, and that would be God. It was initially proposed as there has to be some way to explain our existence outside of God, and that was the big push, was finding a way to do it. And they came up with all of their reasons, and slowly but surely it made its way into the school districts. It made its way as becoming the norm, and every one of us, if you were publicly schooled, we were raised being taught this as facts. The only problem is that when I went to school, the earth was like, I don't know how many times older than when Susan went to school. It keeps getting older really fast, because the more they see that things don't line up, you kind of have to add time, because if you want to tell a fairy tale, you got to start it off with once upon a time, somewhere long ago and far away. It's how you start a fairy tale. I will throw out one thing, and I'm going to close this subject, but I'm throwing it out there because it still remains an underlying thing of teaching kids that they weren't made by God, teaching us that we are animals, teaching people that that truly, the stronger ones do survive and they get the dominant places. When you look at Darwin's Origin of the Species, I don't have the full title memorized, but it's The Origin of the Species, aka, or also, there was the full title, which was The Perseverance of the Preferred or More Dominant Races. That was the second half of Darwin's title, was that the dominant races, i.e. the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Caucasians, that they were the more dominant on the evolutionary scale. And this is why and so it was used to promote slavery. It was used to promote racism. And so it's this stuff that's taught in schools, and it's crazy. But here's one of the cool things that God, I think, gave to me, is when Jubilee was born. Jubilee is now 6. But when she was born that day, the first day in the hospital, I watched as my wife fed her for the very first time. And I've had kids before Jubilee, but one thing that for whatever reason popped to my mind, I said, this blows evolution out of the water. Breastfeeding. Because I started to think about this, right? I mean, we all went to school, and we probably remember the stories, right? A fish became amphibians, amphibians became squirrels, squirrels turned into monkeys, monkeys turned into us, something along those lines. So my question was, okay, wait, mammals, they produce offspring which are dependent on their parents, because mammals breastfeed. That's one of the characteristics of mammals, is that they feed milk to their young, and reptiles don't. So then I started thinking, or amphibians, reptiles, right, whatever. So when this transition went from reptile, amphibian over to mammal, I started thinking, like, okay, so did they start developing breasts? Because reptiles don't need breasts because they don't breastfeed. How long did it take for the first breast to develop, and why were they being developed? Because they couldn't do anything. Did they start developing nipples? I don't know if you can say that in church, but we're going there, right? And then it goes, and then when did the first milk glands develop? How long did it take for enough milk in an animal to actually feed a young? And then the question is that reptiles, who they're born and they can take off and take care of themselves, why did they become dependent on their mothers? Isn't that like a backward step? An animal that can fend for itself from day one to an animal that's dependent on its parent? And it says, like, none of that lines up. And if you actually Google the evolution of breastfeeding, there's some weird theories out there of how this came about. But regardless, there's so many things that if you just look at it logically, it kind of blows it out of the water. Oh, holy smokes. Did I forget my piece of paper again? I did forget it again. I have it on my phone, though. My phone is right here. So, 2 times now I've forgotten to bring with me my list of things, because the second topic on our list, and let's see if I actually got my slides up and running. We talked about evolution already, and now we're moving on to, yes, Marxism. Because this is going to really tie in. These first 2 things are kind of cores that are manifesting themselves in different ways. And so we're going to move into the real contemporary topics and what's going on. But these things are kind of at our core. Now, if I go through all I have downloaded so many PDFs in the last couple days. This is amazing. And so, here we go. 1963 Communist Goals. So, In 1963, it was taken before Congress to talk about communism, Marxism moving into our nation and ways to stop it and put an end to it. And they quoted out of a book called The Naked Communist, written in 1958. Now, The Naked Communist was actually like a satire. It was actually written by a Christian who was kind of showing this is kind of what the communists would do to try and gain control. But it's just like one of those things like Orson Welles or whatever, where it becomes kind of prophetic. It's like, oh man, how did you guess the future so accurately? And so I had highlighted a bunch of these points, and there's 45 points that they cover. But here's some of the things that was said in 1958. In 1958, this is how communism and Marxism is going to grow in the United States. It says you need to get control of the schools. That was point 17, so that you can use them to translate, children into a communist society. Get control of student newspapers. Use student riots to foment public protests against programs and organizations. Infiltrate the press, the books, the news. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. So the idea is we need to get these ideas onto TV, into movies, and out there. They want to start discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. The example they said is to eliminate good sculptures from parks and buildings and put in awkward, shapeless sculptures in their place, i.e. take down our monuments and put up modern art. It says to eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and violation of freedom of speech. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion, and discredit the Bible and begin to make religion be a religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Again, 1963, 5 years later, that happened. This was written 5 years before that happened. And so you can keep going down and down. Discredit the American founding fathers as being selfish aristocrats and slave owners. This is the kind of stuff that they were saying was going to happen ahead of time, that they were guessing, this is the way you're going to get these things into the world. And if you look around today, this is if we look at the news we're now going to look at, this is what's happening, is they've gotten into media and news, they've gotten into the schools, and they're doing all these very things, continuing to promote certain behaviors. And you'll notice it's all promiscuity. It's not just homosexuality. It's all sexual sin to make it normal and acceptable and something that we all should be okay with. They're trying to discredit the Bible. They're trying to discredit the founding fathers. It actually talks about making the Constitution be an outdated, document is one of the things they're trying to do. And if we see what's going on today around us, this is the kind of stuff that is happening. I didn't know how to summarize all this stuff into one category, because this is one of the biggest things, being we're at the very last weekend of Pride Month here in America. But sex, gender, and LGBT, what is going on in the world around us? And again, I had so much stuff. I just tried to put it into some kind of a format that flowed a little bit, but it is a bit overwhelming to see what is going on. So looking at sex, gender, LGBT in our schools is just a good place to start, right? In the Washington State schools, we have recommended reading. In fact, this is off of the recommended reading from Seattle Public Schools. It's called Introducing Teddy by Jessica Walton. In the book it says, "In my heart, I've always known that I'm a girl Teddy, not a boy Teddy. I wish my name was Tilly and not Thomas." What this is the Washington State Sexual Health Standard for kindergarten, because that was a recommended book for kindergartners. I could have gone and got the books from first, second, and third grade. But is to understand there's many ways to express gender. And so this is one of the books that is advised by our state, and by specifically that was Seattle Public Schools, to start reading to the kindergartners, to kind of open their minds and get them ready for what the next steps are. And so this is where, like we talked this morning, homeschooling is a great way to put up some walls, but all it does is buy you time. Because one way or another, as we'll get into some of this other stuff, it's going to be shown to your kids. It will be exposed. It will come out. And so it's one thing to keep our kids away from the bad stuff. It's another thing to be building them up with enough of the good stuff so that they'll be ready to defend themselves when the time comes. Just because we're talking about what's going on in schools, this is a flyer that was handed out in Stewart Middle School in Tacoma. And I know you guys can't see it all that well, but it was a flyer that was created by Planned Parenthood, and it's emphasizing the fact to these 13 and 14-year-olds that you do not need your parents' permission to purchase birth control. You can buy the Plan B birth control, which is, the idea where they kill whatever may have happened the night after, the day after. And at the bottom, it specifies that, again, you do not need parent permission or consent to get an abortion at any age. So this is the information that they're giving to 13 and 14-year-olds so that they're well-informed and can make well-informed decisions. I don't know how it got stuck in the middle. I'll come back to that here in a little bit. So moving up to the college level, just seeing things that are going on. Again, I try to stay locally. Seattle Pacific University is a Christian university in our state. And recently, the Faculty Senate received responses of about 72% voting no confidence in their board of directors. Why? Because their board of directors were choosing to continue to hold fast to their hiring policy. Now you have to agree to biblical moral standards to be a teacher there. I.e., you need to be a teacher and you need to believe in the Bible if you're going to teach Christians at a Christian college. Well, again, 3/4 of the staff put a vote of no confidence towards their directors trying to get things changed because they think that they're going to hold back Seattle Pacific University and that Christian college. So this isn't just something in secular schools. This is why I was mentioning if you can do whatever your kids while they're in the house, but you send them off to the university, and once they get there, this is the kind of stuff that they'll be hit with. And so Daniel, 14 years old, faced with all the delicacies and the king's wine and all the other stuff, and he says, he determined in his heart, I will not defile myself. How do you get kids to have that kind of mentality? My alma mater, Central Washington University, classes that I just quickly picked up by just going by through their course guide was, the Introduction to Queer Studies. There's the Queer Theory and Sexuality, and of course, Food, Sex, and Other Everyday Religion and Morality. So this is the kind of stuff that they're teaching at the college universities, and depending on the degree you want, some of these are required classes. The Food, Sex, and the Other. This is one of 2 required classes. If you want to get a degree in religion at Central Washington University, you have 2 choices, and this is one of your 2. For it was like you get this or this, this or this. You guys remember how it went. Then you have to pick like it's either you have to study Buddhism or Greek and Roman mythology. You have to pick one. But when you get down to Western religion, you can either choose Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or there's one other option. And you only need one of those 4, and you can have a degree in religion. But this one is one of those ones where, it's one of 2, where Christianity is one of 4 options that you have to pick if you want to get a degree in religion. Now, kind of moving outside of the schools really quick, just because we're talking about what's going on in the world. This one just jumped out and I added it last minute. But we have Laurel Hubbard is going to be the very first male to female transgender weightlifter to participate in the upcoming Olympic Games. So it is a man who has transitioned to be a woman, who currently has been just dominating world women's records in weightlifting. And so people, I just read Brett Favre was quoting how it's just, again, he was saying no one like this should be allowed into the Olympics. Like letting a man compete in women's weightlifting just doesn't seem fair, and he said and actually this is Brett Favre saying, he said, biology is not bigotry. I like that. I was like, yeah, biology is not bigotry. He's like, I don't think it's fair. But this is the stuff, again, kind of giving you a heads up of what's going on. Back to the kids, though. I didn't want to emphasize the kids today because, once again, it's kind of like we're old enough to make our own decisions. But what is the world that the upcoming generation is going to be doing? And what's the upcoming generation going to be hearing? Because even if you don't have any kids, right? At some point, they're going to become the guy who changes your oil. They're going to become the ones who are your doctors. They're going to become the ones who are going to be running our healthcare systems, medical systems, our government. You know, the future is in our children. And so this is the world that they're being brought up in, is what is normal to them. Right before COVID hit, we probably are not too unfamiliar with the drag queen story time that was becoming very popular nationwide. We had members of the church actually go down and take pictures and interview and talk when they were doing it down in Tri-Cities. There was a pastor in Spokane who got arrested for protesting at a drag queen story time. He was holding a sign across the street, and he was arrested for whatever reasons. It did eventually get dropped, and the Pacific Justice League did jump in and defend him, or Pacific Justice Institute, whom I make reference to sometimes, and I'm a regular donator to those guys. They are great. They'll defend any Christian, or anyone, truly, for free. So you get sued for baking cakes wrong, or you get sued for talking in your classroom, or you get sued for whatever. These guys will jump in and they will defend you absolutely free. Now, so let's say we're not talking about the schools, because, you know, your kid's homeschooled or whatever. You know, our kids don't have all these outside in. They go to the Christian school. Well, it doesn't matter, because, again, the way it's getting into our kids through the media. This I saw on Facebook today. Luca proves Disney Pixar wasn't brave enough to fully commit to the first queer animated film. From the article, it says, while the implications of queerness are there, particularly in the friendship between Luca and Alberto, it's disappointing that Disney's Pixar wasn't brave enough to fully commit to their first queer animated tale. And what's funny is, here's the reality, guys, because this is all, we're family and we talk transparently with each other. I'm sitting here preparing notes, and my kids, Judah or whoever, walks up and goes, oh, we watched that last night. I text Nicole, you guys watched that last night? She's like, was it a bad one? How do you even know? You start watching, it's supposed to be about some sea monster creatures in the world, and you don't pick it up. And the funny thing is, she says, well, I watched a while, I didn't notice anything. And I go, well, that's the catch. You see, it's your kids aren't going to watch a blatantly bad movie, but how many little movies with little things will slowly get worked in where things become normalized and we don't even realize it. I wanted to go back up a bit and do a little bit of history searching and just see, like, you know, it's funny because I saw all these memes, people joking about, for the 800th time, Disney is going to release their first, LGBT role. Because they keep saying it's like our first time with LGBT, but they keep doing it again and again because they've actually done it quite a few times. Back up to 2013 and the great story of Frozen. That's a little girl's classic. Every little girl loves Frozen. But, in the story of Frozen, again, I'm not trying to nitpick stuff. My kids watched Frozen and they still have watched Frozen. This kind of stuff, I put it this way. I'm going to preach hard to you guys tonight because I need to be preached hard to, because I need a heart check again and again. Is it really worth it? Is it really worth it because the music's so good, because the show is so fun, because of this or that, when I realize that I'm compromising on things? So in the movie, there's a scene with Oaken's trading post, where Oaken, the dude at the trading post, he refers to his family. And when he turns to his family, you see there in the sauna, and it's another man and a bunch of kids. Now, are you paying close enough attention to know these little things? I'll mention this, the classic hit, Let It Go, from the movie Frozen, that my daughter loves to sing and everyone knows the words. It was also, at the time of the release, like one of the #1 songs being sung at pride parades. And in these gatherings, I remember watching a video of some 7-year-old girl, at a pride parade singing Let It Go. And you pull up the words and you realize that no, the main character is not a blatant lesbian or anything like that. But when you hear, don't let them in, don't let them see, be the good girl you always have to be. These are the lessons her parents taught her. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. Well, now they know, so let it go, let it go. I can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, turn away and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say. And it goes on. And that's the whole idea of the story, is I was supposed to be concealing this thing about me, but now it's out of the closet. And so now I'm just going to let it go and let everyone see who I really am. So once again, that could be a good message for kids in a way, right? We want kids to be comfortable with who they are and be open. But you can also then see a whole other angle to that story and that message. So the question you just have to ask yourself simply is this: can we defend that as being a harmless song? Absolutely. I could defend it as a harmless song. My question is can I defend the creators if that was their intent? Was it their intent to be a harmless song, or was their intent different? Little by little, we find little things. In 2016, Zootopia, movie my kids and I have watched numerous times, and I didn't know until I started looking it up on my own, that Bucky and Bronx Antlerson, the neighbors of the main character, are, as again, the directors, two directors of the movie openly said they were the voices of these two antelope neighbors. And they said, yes, we were a gay couple. That was our intent with the movie. Yeah, it's only in brief passing. You don't really notice it. But yes, our intent was to represent a gay couple in our kids' movies. I can go all day long with Beauty and the Beast and LaFoe dance. He talks about he doesn't know if he's supposed to, I think, admire Gaspar or to kiss Gaspar. And at the end of the movie, he's dancing with a man and letting it go. In the movie Onward, in the movie, there is a police officer, and she refers to her girlfriend. My kids and I really enjoyed the movie, Netflix movie, The Mitchells versus the Machines. It was funny. There was a lot of throwbacks. If you're a child of like the 80s and 90s, there was lots of great throwback stuff until all the way to the closing credits of the movie. And the mom's talking to the daughter on Zoom or whatever, and the daughter's at college. Oh, bring your girlfriend back with you. We made it through the entire movie, and the credits are rolling, and then Nicole and I are like, hey, it's like this stuff gets dropped in there. Are my kids noticing it? Well, after time, they will notice it. It's even in Star Wars, the final of the Star Wars trilogy, the 9th movie, where there's a couple of the women kissing in the closing scenes of the celebration of the movie. So again, it's working its way into all the stuff our kids watch and see. And yeah, it's getting to the point where you might want to consider going to, and I didn't put a picture up for you, but Plugged In is a great website. I believe it's actually through Focus on the Family, or at least they do a lot of stuff with Focus on the Family. But they review movies, and they'll tell you all the content of the movies. And I actually went through the Machines movie, and at the very bottom I noticed where that was mentioned. It's like, well, if I had actually read the review, I would have known, and I could have turned it off early. We could have not watched it. I could have watched The Rifleman. There's all these options of other things I could have been doing. Or again, you learn to teach your kids. You guys have to decide how to use this information as you counsel your children on how to parent their children. No one wants you to tell you how to parent your children, but it's just give the information. Because if we're not educated on what's out there, then we can't have any say, and we don't really know what's going on. Now, really what's big in the news and what's really big in our country right now is the critical race theory, and it's been going on for a while. I didn't know what it was called when I first started experiencing it in the Grandview School District as a teacher, as they're training us and teaching us all these things. But I started finding out that this is what it was. I just didn't know what it was called yet. This was years ago at this point. And I remember my boss at the time was Steve Long, a great guy, and he was trying to pass on what he's been told from the top down. And so really, to start off, critical race theory, I'm not going to try and go into an exhaustive description of what it is. But for those who aren't as familiar, I'm hoping we can at least have a kind of a grounding. And the real first thing I think of critical race theory is that color matters. That is one of the things they teach. In many ways, critical race theory, in my honest opinion, it promotes racism, is what it does. So as a teacher, what I was being taught by the Grandview School District, and I'm not, again, this is a lot of top-down stuff. So, you don't pick on this because they're getting told from them and they're getting told from them. But in short, equity versus equality. Equality is everyone gets even. Equity is you distribute differently according to need. And actually in the Proverbs, God is called equitable. He realizes when some people need more help. When some people need an extra hand up, you give those people. That's a good concept, and it's a biblical concept that some of you might be fine on your own. Others of you might need some extra counseling, extra encouragement. And as a pastor, I have to try and, give the attention where it's needed, not just, well, I gave you your 2 minutes, now I got to give them their 2 minutes. But then they start saying things like, well, right off the bat, if your child or student in your classroom is a Mexican student, you're going to assume that they need more help because they're Mexican. And that was what we were being taught, and that is what is taught in critical race theory, is that you look at things, and if they fit certain categories, you were supposed to categorize people, and then you're supposed to determine that this is the category they belong in, and this is the kind of attention that they're supposed to get. And along with that, it basically has the whole idea of, yes, the white privilege, and so here's the thing too I will throw out, is that if you have these conversations with people about these things, understand that there are some underlying truths there. There are underlying truths in all these things, like critical race theory. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Understand there's a conversation worth having with people, but try and bring them back to reality and bring them back to logic. But part of the idea is that white people, I am the worst of the worst. I'm white, I'm a man, and I'm a heterosexual. Those are like the three big ticks against me that set me apart as being, the biggest of oppressors. And because of that, I have to actively denounce my position as a privileged man, and I need to seek the forgiveness of those who are not as privileged as me, actively, because it is my fault, and I need to own up to it. And maybe go and do some studies and stuff like that, because it kind of makes you wonder. It's like, well, so all of us, we have to go back and figure out where our ancestry is so we can determine how many people we have to say we're sorry to. But interesting, combining our last two topics, in Seattle, there was a gay pride parade this month. This is only news from last week. And it was actually a black gay pride event. And they were charging white people reparation costs to attend. Only white people had to pay. Anyone else could go to the event for free, but white people were charged between $15 and $50, depending on their ability, to pay for reparations against the black community. And so this is something that is getting pushed not only just in society, but also in our schools. A little later, we're going to go through all the laws that have been passed recently. And I'll just kind of quickly give you the names and numbers and hit them so you understand. But in Seattle public schools, what we're finding is that teachers, this is a march taking place where New York Post is covering stuff that's going on here in Washington State, Nathan Hale High School. I used to drive by that high school on my way to church every Sunday morning growing up as a kid. White teachers must recognize that they are assigned considerable power and privilege in our society because of their possession of white skin. And to atone, they must self-consciously reject their whiteness and become dedicated anti-racist educators. Teaching that if you were raised as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, that you might not realize the type of racism is out there. That's actually something worth having a conversation over. I will admit, I didn't realize how much racism was still around until I started hanging out with people from different backgrounds, until I started hanging out with Mexican families and hearing how other people had treated them, because I started off in Seattle public schools where, I wasn't a majority necessarily in the school district that I was in. And when we moved up to Shoreline from Seattle as a kid, my mom will never let me live down. The first day of third day, the first thing I said when I came home from school was, where did all the black kids go? Because it was a shocker, because I moved from a really diverse school district up into where it was all white and Chinese. It was pretty much the whole entire Shoreline school district at that time. But it was when I started getting to know, like, for instance, Kyle and his wife Sylvia and Sylvia's family. And I started talking to them and the Gillis, or her family, just about some of the experience they'd had in Kittitas County and the way they've been treated. So you see, I did grow up personally kind of colorblind. But then it did make me a bit ignorant to what was still going on in our country. So there's underlying truths worth having conversations about, that you might be unaware of what's going on because of the fact that you were raised up sheltered from it. But then to say, to atone, this is what you must do. This is where the theory goes, boom, and it really starts creating problems, where we start telling people, now you must atone for your sin of being white. What? And it is craziness, because as thinking about these notes last night, again at the men's rally, I look around the room, and there's white guys, there's Mexican guys, we got Jeremy there, Yakima tribe, and we're laughing, we're telling stories, and we're brothers. And there's not one little thing that skin color makes a difference. You see, the gospel solves these problems. Jesus Christ solves these problems. And sometimes, if we are willing, this may be another push for the Christian church, is too many people want to be activists and just denounce everything as evil and speak out against it. And they close the doors and burn the bridges before you could have conversations with these people. Because I've had conversations with people, a former youth Bible study member was coming to me, and she was organizing a Black Lives Matter, march, and we were talking about it, and I was like, let me give you a book. And I gave her Greg Laurie's Jesus Revolution. And I was like, Jesus can solve all these problems, and he has before. When the hippies was a group of people who were misunderstood and were outcasts, Jesus came and fixed everything. And so there's a great conversation to have there with people. Do you really want to solve racism? Jesus can solve this problem. Do you want to solve inequalities and poverty? Jesus can solve these things. And so we should understand what other people and where they're coming from so that we actually have open doors to converse with them while also protecting our homes and our children. So it's a two-sided thing there. We're not trying to separate ourselves from these people entirely. We're trying to protect our own, but also be able to engage them with the gospel to help these people come to know the Lord. And so, there's all the funness of all that kind of stuff. I will say this, is that this is all the crazy things going on in schools right now. And I'll mention some of those laws that get passed that are coming up in just a second. That critical race theory has been approved by Inslee. It will be taught to teachers. So it's mandated. I used to have a paid teacher in-service day. Remember, the kids don't have school and the teachers had to go to work. And one day of the year must be dedicated to training Washington State teachers in critical race theory. And this is like we saw, Seattle Public Schools, they're just the ones, spearheading all of the horrible stuff. And so they've already been doing the training. But in Grandview next year, one day will be dedicated to that. So, if you want to voice out to your school district and to your school board, you can tell them, I don't like this. Here's just a quick fact, is that if you all own a home, you pay property tax. If you own a rental property, you pay more property tax. 40% of Washington State homeowners' property taxes goes to public schools, which means that you are funding this education, right? So you have a voice. And when the Grandview School District tried to bring in that Planned Parenthood sex education, and I didn't even go into all the sex education, the comprehensive sex education stuff, that was really big news last year. And if you're not familiar with it, be thankful, but also Google and try to understand what's going on there. But we had 200 some people show up. When one of the school board members let me know about it, we got together the pastors, we informed the churches, and we had so many people showing up about that. And I did my best to try and get as many people. I was calling pastors to let the school district know. And you know what? They dropped it, because the people have power in our city, just like we do in the White House and in the Senate and in the House, because we're voters. We just have to know what we're talking about so we can vote and voice our opinions and start bugging senators with phone calls. But 40% of your property taxes goes to schools. So the stuff going on in the schools, it's something that you're involved in. Fun facts before we move on. 1940, teachers' top concerns. Number 1, talking out of turn. Number 2, chewing gum. Number 3, making noise. Number 4, running in the halls, cutting in line, dress code infractions, and littering. A similar list was given to teachers in the 90s. It began with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, pregnancy, suicide, rape, robbery, and assault. Once again, the schools are changing. And it was wisely said, when we have mass shootings in our schools and those types of things taking place, we have no right to say, where was God when it was voted to kick him out? People can't say, where was God when, we kicked him out of our schools. And he used to be a big part of our schools. Now, I mean, this is twice my age ago, but I talked to people who were in public schools in the 50s. And I've heard multiple people say, I remember every day in 5th grade, they'd gather us together in the cafeteria, they'd read a psalm and say a prayer. So I need to share that because most of the people in this room didn't have that experience growing up. But maybe your parents or your grandparents or whatnot, like that was normal in our country at one point in time, that in public schools the Bible was read, that there was prayer every day, and kids were being taught you're made in the image of God, not, just animals. And so, again, we shouldn't be surprised when things go crazy. Now, I wanted to give some facts, just kind of up-to-date statistics on this, because, again, it's what's going on in the world, but it's all to protect the children. And that was a big emphasis for me this week, was just when those young kids were carried off to Babylon, what were they facing? Well, what they weren't facing is really the access to information, and by that, horrible and wicked information that is available today. So I just have these facts written down, but right now, 53% of children have a smartphone by age 11. So by age 11, half the kids in our nation will have a smartphone, and 84% of teenagers will have a smartphone. They were polling teens on how much time they spent on their phone. And they did mention that things could double dip, because how much time do you spend texting, how much time on social media? So they said, well, if they're texting and on social media, the numbers might get skewed. But it was more than 7 hours a day for teenagers, and nearly 5 hours a day for kids between the ages of 8 and 12. This is the amount of time spent on the internet. I just found this fact interesting. It says that young people from families making $35,000 or less per year spend about twice as much time as families making more than $100,000 a year. And as you read on, they kind of said it makes sense, because handing kids a smartphone is cheaper than ballet lessons or piano lessons. And poverty makes a difference, because when you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you don't have the time to invest in your children as someone who has one good paying job and can come home and invest in their children. So some of this stuff, once again, we have to remember that poverty does make a big difference, and it really does, make parenting harder. But thank God there's a place that people can go and seek help. It's called the church, where we can help take care of each other's kids, where we can give advice, where we can help meet financial needs of our brothers and sisters. That's the kind of thing, again, Jesus is the answer to all these problems. The gospel really is the answer to all these problems, and revival is the answer to the church's problem of being apathetic about these things that really should be addressed. I mentioned this morning, about 2/3 of parents have ever checked their child's viewing history. That means even just one time it counted. So that also means that 1/3 of parents who have kids with these devices have never, ever gone to see what their kid was looking at. They've never taken the time to see, what was my child looking at on this device that whole time. And only about 1/3 of parents have some form of monitoring software. You can buy software that you put onto the phone, and things will flag and go off. In fact, actually, Caleb was setting our computer off this morning. I had a notification on my phone. Tile texted me, why is the word porn on the phone? I go, sorry, that's my notes for the sermon. But the word triggered off the thing, and all of a sudden, there's text going out. Because, there's stuff out there to support families. There's free stuff. And then for those of you who are really rich, there's stuff that costs $6 a month to protect your children and your whole house, your husband and your wife. I mean, that's the thing, is like, it's not just the kids, it's for all the family, having that accountability. I remember reading a book where someone said that, they were struggling with pornography, and so they put accountability software on their phone, and they gave the notifications to his fiance's dad, because he really wanted to quit. But the reality is there's that stuff out there. On the topic of pornography, 5 to 8%, that's 1 in 20. Now, hey, we're at church, so maybe the numbers are different here, but that would be one person in the room. It says 5 to 8% of Americans are addicted to pornography, which they define by watching 12 or more hours a week. The average age of a person first seeing internet porn is now 11. That's the average age. The highest demographic of growing internet pornography users are ages 8 to 11 years old. 93% of 18-year-old boys have seen pornography. And in, whatever, a close is in something in hand grenades. I forget how the saying goes. But you call 90%, that's everyone. I mean, when you're in the 90s, 25% of search engine requests are related to sex. 35% of downloads from the internet are pornographic. 70% of men aged 18 to 24 visit a porn site at least once per month. And I heard another statistic that something like 80% of all men have seen a pornographic image within the last month, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It just pops up, and then they might intentionally shut it down and get away from it. But it's the fact that it's so out there. The last bonus fact, Sunday is the most popular day of the week for viewing pornography on the internet. Now, as far as, again, our kids and protecting them, it says the Crimes Against Children Research Center says that 1 in 5 teenagers have received a sexual salutation via the web, but only about 25% of those youth told a parent. 20% of kids have been solicited on the web. Now, I shared this video on my personal Facebook profile before I left home, but there's a video called The Social Media Dangers Exposed, and it's by a group called Bark. And basically this mother, a 37-year-old mom with a team from that group, she poses as an 11-year-old. And she creates multiple social media accounts. She creates a Twitter, an Instagram, a Facebook, does the whole gambit. And so she's posing, and it's very blatant. She is an 11-year-old girl. She creates the accounts go live. Within 1 hour, 7 adult men had contacted her. By the end of 9 days, there was 92 men that had contacted her. And I'm not going to quote the things, but if you watch the video, which they give a warning, may be disturbing for some viewers. If you want to watch it, you can see the things that those men were saying to the supposed 11-year-old girl. So the question once again is why are our kids any different? If someone makes a fake account as an 11-year-old girl, why is my actual 11-year-old girl going to be any different if she's allowed to have a social media account? In those statistics I looked at, it did talk about parents where it's like how many percent of parents, they say like, well, we'll let our kids have social media, but I have your password and I get to log onto your account and I get to see everything that you get to see. And you know what? Kids don't like the argument, and if you have nothing to hide, there's no problem with that, is there? If you're not doing anything you don't want me to know, then you shouldn't mind me being on there. And if you're doing things you don't want me to be, no, I'm not going to let you on there. So, or just not have social media. I think most of us here, grew up without social media. I'm one of the original Facebook members from 2005. Had Facebook for a long time. That was back when you had to be enrolled in a 4-year university to get Facebook. You had to have a college email when Facebook first came out. All right. We're bringing things to a close here. This is the Washington State laws. There's going to be a lot of words up on the screen. Bear with me. I'll read it and I'll try and explain a little bit what's going out. Almost all of these have passed just recently. HB House Bill 1009. If a health plan is issued or renewed on or after January 1st, 2019, provides coverage for maternity care or services, the health plan must also provide a covered person with substantially equivalent coverage to permit the abortion of a pregnancy. So again, the idea is the law basically says, if your health care provides any maternity care, you must provide abortion coverage with that medical program. So again, if you're an employer and you are paying for your employees' medical program and you want to give them any medical towards maternity, you have to also fund abortions. This is now a law effective next month. Just shy of 1 month of today, this will be in effect. House Bill 1141, Increasing Access to the Death with Dignity Act is the title. And so a summarization I made would increase access to the Death with Dignity Act and decrease the waiting period for patients from 15 days just to 72 hours. It also allows for lesser qualified medical staff to authorize and prescribe the lethal doses and to make determinations of mental competence. So once again, it's speeding up the process and making it just easier for people just to choose to end life. I don't want to live and just make it happen quick and easy. Speaking with a friend not long ago, this is just related, because that's one of the things, is just the way that the system is making things so easy, open, and accessible. It's not on here, but someone who was going through a transition from one gender to the other just comments on that. I was able to walk into my doctor, say, I don't think I'm a this, I'm a that. I had a prescription written for me and I walked out and I began treatments. There was no evaluation. There was no anything else. That was how easy it was to transition genders. They're just from here to there, done. You have to think about how life-changing that is. I always remind, the teenagers, it's like, the laws being passed, and I didn't look this up, and this is something maybe worth knowing tonight, but is they're continuing to pass more laws nationally, and I didn't see anything in Washington as I was looking at the most recent stuff. Maybe it's from the last court, sessions, trying to make it so that less and less people have the right to interfere with a teen or even preteen if they decide they want to transition genders. They keep passing laws that parents can't intervene because that's child abuse. Now, all of you need to think about this for a second. And if you're my age, it works great. It depends on who all ages. But do you remember how you dressed in middle school? Would you let that person make a life-changing decision? I mean, that's kind of what I like to think about, is the way I dressed in middle school. It's like, holy moly, was I a lost kid and confused. And it's like, but we're letting these kids make life-changing and somewhat irreversible. If you try and back out of a gender sex transition, I mean, you can, but some stuff doesn't go away. Some stuff you're altered for life. And the only way to even try and back out of it is just to pump yourself full of a bunch of other stuff. And that can't be that healthy either. So again, they're trying to increase access to these things like the Death with Dignity Act, like gender transitions. And so speaking of gender transitions, I think it's the one. 5313, SB 5313, a health carrier may not deny or limit coverage for gender-affirming treatment when that treatment is prescribed to an individual because of or related to or consent with a person's gender expression or identity. And it's medically necessary. So once again, this person I was speaking of, they went in and said, I think it's medically necessary. And the doctor said, okay. And so the healthcare, whether it is your company's healthcare that you own and you are paying for your employees' health, whether it is your business that you are a part of's healthcare, of which you contribute to that pool, right, with your healthcare, or whether it is the state-funded healthcare, whether or not you use it, you pay for it, they cannot deny paying for gender transitions as a treatment. So this is where your money is going. Again, past, SB 5140, law that allows religious hospitals to be liable for lawsuit if denying an abortion in certain situations. So this is basically situations where some medical professionals will say, well, an abortion is the safer option, but there are alternatives. Well, if the people aren't happy that they propose an alternative, they're now, before they were protected, like, well, we're not going to do that. If you want that, this is the way we would advise you going. If you want to go with an abortion, you need to go to a different hospital. Now those hospitals can be sued. And there are still religious hospitals. In fact, hospitals were created by Christians, for those who don't know. All right. So some of this stuff, I didn't summarize it in great depth, but there's more to it. So they passed a bill for more comprehensive school counseling. 50/30. Now, in some senses, that's a good thing. School counselors help children. They want to get more counselors to have more one-on-one time with more kids, which could be good if it's a good counselor promoting what we would like them to promote. But at this point, seeing the typical public school teacher and the typical push of the agendas of the states having more personalized, direct influence on our children, is it a good thing or not? Again, it all depends. We have Christian counselors in the Grandview School District. We have non-Christian ones too. But the point is again, it's just something where it's in the school districts to get more influence into the kids' lives. And that's part of the bill talks about. We know that, having an adult in your life can influence you. And so we want to get more influence on the kids. So again, it's like, well, that's a here or there kind of a thing. It depends on what kind of influence. It's worth noting that we did not pass. This one's currently in the works, going back to be revised. So this one still is time for the public to voice. But like Oregon, the decriminalization of harder drugs, right? Marijuana is legal. Decriminalization is not saying it's legal to have it, but when it's criminalized, you get in big trouble for having it. Now it just becomes more of a slap on the wrist, and you shouldn't be doing that. That's what they did down in Oregon, where they're outlawing straws, but saying okay to heroin. So just kind of the stuff that's going on. One more. It is, and this is what we just talked about, concerning professional learning, equity, cultural competency, and dismantling institutional racism in the public schools. So this is where the critical race theory was voted to be put into effect into the teachers. That's this time around. It is not officially mandated to be taught to children. But I know in North Carolina, there was a big case where a middle school teacher had all the 13 and 14-year-old boys stand at the front of the class and apologize. All the 13 and 14-year-old white boys apologize for their privilege to all of their non-white boy heterosexual friends. And so it's moving that direction. I think it's just worth noting. This is Senator Phil Fortunato, and he's writing to the Attorney General, General Ferguson, and he's telling him in there about how he's concerned about all of these laws that have just been passed. So the ones we were just covering, that's what he's talking about. And he's writing to the Attorney General saying this is unconstitutional, the stuff that's getting passed in our state, and he has concern. So once again, we live in a unique society. We live in a unique day and age where we have the right to vote, to voice our opinion. If you have free time, irritate a senator. Call them every day if you can. It's one of those things where eventually they do listen quite often because they get tired of the phone calls, but they have to take them. And so we need to keep letting people know, what's going on around us. And the church needs to be vocal. But once again, you cannot legislate morality. We will never be able to legislate morality. We need to oppose evil, but we're not going to make people good by passing better laws. Like, we need to pass a law that promotes morality. No. We need people to get saved, is what we need to see happen. And all of this stuff becomes a moot point. And so that's why when I see prophecy updates, it makes me just want to dig into the Word of God and obey it and go out and make disciples. When I see the state of the union and the morality of our nation and our state and our home, it doesn't make me want to go run for Congress. It makes me want to share the gospel and get the gospel out there to help heal our lands and take care of these things. One last resource, last slide. The Family Policy Institute of Washington. A lot of the information I got concerning the news and current events in Washington. You can follow them on Facebook. I was on their website, but it was great because I at least, again, I don't even watch the news because it's so depressing. And so following them on Facebook or something, at least you'll kind of see what's going on in Washington, and it just kind of keeps you up to date of what's going on so you can be aware of what your children, your grandchildren, your cousins, your nieces, your nephews are going to be experiencing, and just what's going on elsewhere. And so this is what's going on in the world around us. And there is a natural response to this situation, and it's prayer. It's the idea that we believe in a sovereign, all-powerful God who has all things in his hands. And if you do have kids, then you need to realize that you can't save them, and you can't shield them forever, and you can't win them back if they've gotten lost, but you can pray for them And God could do things that you can't do. We cannot change the White House, but we can pray. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here. I don't usually call the shots and this kind of stuff, but I'm just going to go on a limb and say Biden doesn't come across as a born-again believer to me. I don't usually like to even make statements about people's salvation, but I'm just saying, I'm just kind of observing some fruit. But wouldn't it be awesome if he was? Wouldn't it be awesome to see Governor Inslee receive Jesus as Lord and Savior and become a radical Christian? Wouldn't it be awesome to see Henry Strom, the superintendent of our school district in Grandview, and I don't know the superintendents of the other neighboring school districts, but again, it would change things. It would change everything if people got saved. And so let's pray tonight that God would move in our land, that the church would be moved to pray for these people, and that we'd be praying for these things on a regular basis and seeking his face, and that God would heal our land. So let's just begin our night in prayer and worship and seeking him. Heavenly Father, we thank you for tonight, and we thank you that, Lord, you are on